Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sophie Sparks. I'm the Community Manager here at the Information Lab, and it's my great pleasure to have my colleague Jenny Martin giving a webinar today on AWS, triggering an Alteryx workflow using Lambda. Jenny is one of my fantastic colleagues here at the Information Lab. She's a Tableau and Alteryx consultant, and she's also a joint organizer of prepping data. So she is all about cleaning up, scheduling, and manipulating data sets. She's fantastic. So Jenny, would you like to unmute yourself and we'll get started? Now, everyone, if you do have any questions for Jenny, or if you'd just like to say hi, please do drop them into the chat box. Jenny will be answering any questions you have in there. And the recording for this will go out in about a day's time. So if you do miss anything, or if you'd like to rewatch it, please keep your eyes out on your email and I'll send an email around when the recording's gone up with a link to it. Thank you. Jenny, over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sophie. I'll just get my screen sharing instead there. So yeah, today I'm going to be going through triggering an Alteryx workflow using an AWS service called Lambda. So why would you want to do this? First of all, let's all get on the same page about that. So mostly when you've built your Alteryx workflow, you're cleaning up some data, maybe you publish it to your Alteryx gallery and you want to set it to run on a certain schedule. So usually that would be maybe once a day, once a week, once a month, but that kind of relies on you having refreshed data, a reason for you to actually be running the workflow at all. So what the benefit of using Lambda to run your Alteryx workflow is that actually it's only going to run the workflow once there's new data each time. So that's kind of the reason you're not taking up your resources on the Alteryx gallery by having the workflow run when there's no new data. It's only running when there's something new to update. So that might be a reason why you might want to use this process. So this content of the webinar, I'd like to just give a shout out to former colleague of ours, Ben Moss. He designed all this. You may have seen a blog that he wrote back in February this year. That's on the Information Lab's website. And this is just a walkthrough of that topic. And our use case that we're looking at is that we have data that is refreshed every month, and it could be any time during that month. And we only want the Alteryx workflow to run when that new data appears in an S3 bucket. So the main components that we're going to be looking at today, we've got our S3 bucket, where our data is going to be dropped each month, and we don't know when that is, and that's why we're using AWS Lambda to connect to the Alteryx Gallery API to run that workflow that is sitting on Alteryx Gallery. So let's go and do a quick demonstration of how that looks when it's all set up. So let's go ahead and go to our S3 bucket here. So that's showing the workflow at the moment. Let's go to the S3 bucket. So the name of this S3 bucket is transaction file uploads, and you can see a list of all of the sort of year and the month of this new data that is coming in each month. So let's go ahead and drop in, say, October's data. So I'm just going to drag that in, upload that, and you'll see that it's all green, all been successful there. If I come along to Lambda now, then you'll see at the top here that we've got a trigger, a little picture of a bucket there. So this Lambda function is connected to that bucket where I just dropped that new file. And if I come along to monitor and look at our logs, then what we're hoping to see here is that as I've dropped in that new data, we've got a new log happening. Okay, so 12:36, that's about now. So something's happened, something's been triggered because we've dropped in some new data. And we can just expand this one here that looks like it's got the most information, and we can see what's happened from that workflow. This is like the same messages that you get at the bottom of your workflow when you run it in Alteryx Designer. And we can see that everything's worked as we hoped it would. It's all written its data to the database as we hope. So here is the workflow sat on Alteryx Gallery, but let's have a look at the workflow itself in a little more detail. So it's Quite a simple workflow, I hope you'll agree. We've got our little connection here to S3 bucket. So if you are not familiar with this tool itself, then that is in the connectors tool palette at the top here. So this is just how we're connecting ourselves to that S3 bucket from Alteryx Designer. So when I click on that, then you'll see that all that we need to get up and running with that is our AWS access key, our AWS secret key, which you can get from your AWS admins or set up yourself using the IAM on your Alteryx, on your AWS configuration manager there. So that's where you get that information in order to be able to connect to your S3 bucket. And you can see that we're picking up one file here at the moment. So we pick up that file, we do a little bit of data manipulation, we, select some fields. We're reading in CSVs, so we want the data types to be nice and updated, say changing the dates to be dates rather than strings, changing the numbers to be doubles, that sort of thing. And then we're writing them to a database here. But okay, I've been referring to this as a workflow throughout, but you may notice the eagle-eyed among you that these are some interface tools, and interface tools don't exist in workflows. So actually, this is an analytic app where we're looking at the file name, and that is the dynamic part of this workflow, of this app. We want each time a new file is uploaded to our S3 bucket, that file to be picked up. And to introduce that dynamic interactive element, we have these interface tools where we're going to be updating our file name each time. And if you think about it, when it's on gallery itself, when we hit run, then we're prompted to put in our file name here. And basically joining the dots there will be AWS Lambda will be looking at the S3 bucket to find that file name and pass it here and insert that into there and then hit run. That's basically what Lambda is going to be doing for us. Okay, so now we have a kind of overall picture of what we're trying to achieve. How do we then go ahead and do that? So, and again, as I say, Ben's got loads of great resources for us in his blog, including some code in GitHub as well, which is all shared, all accessible. So that makes my job today really easy for this webinar. So if we come to Lambda, and I'm going to go back to the functions and just start creating a new function together. So if we're creating a new function, I'm just going to call this demo for now. Then one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that the language that we're using in Lambda, the function that we are creating, we are using Python. But as you can see, any code that you're kind of comfortable in, you can use that instead in order to trigger this same process. But because Ben has done it in Python 3.8, that's what we're going to use here too. And we're not going to worry about anything, any advanced permissioning or settings for now. We're just going to go ahead and create that function. So now we're going to get a similar screen to what I was showing earlier with the function that was already created for us, except you'll notice that, for example, at the top here, we don't have any triggers, so we haven't connected it to our S3 bucket yet. And at the moment, if we look into our code, then we don't really have anything useful. We've got what Lambda will create for us by default. So for example, here the code's just, saying hello from Lambda. That's kind of typical when you're first starting off coding, isn't it? That's the first thing you do. You write a function that says, hello world. Lambda's much the same here, but it's just a placeholder so that we know where to put our relevant functions from what Ben's prepared for us earlier. So, okay, let's start off with the trigger. So we've got a nice big button here telling us to add our trigger in. And you can connect it. It doesn't just have to be connected to an S3 bucket. That's the example we're using today. But you can see that there are many different events that you could connect to of things that are happening in other applications that could trigger this function to run. But for us, we're just using our S3 bucket. And we're finding that same transaction file uploads bucket as before. And we're just saying that, hey, when that file is uploaded onto our S3 bucket, that's when we want the workflow, this function, sorry, to run. And we want it to only be CSVs that trigger this function to run, and therefore our suffix that we're adding on here is .csv. So if an Excel file gets uploaded, for example, this won't trigger our Lambda function to run because that's not what our Alteryx workflow is built for, and therefore that's the only time we want this to be triggered. Okay, and therefore we just have to tick this little bucket to explain that, okay, we understand what we're doing here, that this could cause cost for, for our AWS service, and then we hit add. Now I'm going to get an error here when I hit add because this is a trigger that overlaps with another trigger because it's from the function that we already have in Lambda. So don't worry too much about the fact that I'm getting an error here. I'm expecting that. But if I was creating this from scratch, then we would then have our little bucket here. Okay, so we've got our trigger. That part is ticked. We know that we're all connected to the S3 bucket. Now, we've mentioned a couple of times the fact that we're going to use the Alteryx Gallery API in order to communicate with Alteryx Gallery and in order to get that workflow running. So how do we do that? As I said, luckily, when we come to Ben's blog, there's a link through to the Information Lab GitHub here, which has all of the Python code needed to sort of initialize that authentication through the Alteryx Gallery API and how we're going to actually execute that workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm literally just going to go ahead and highlight all of this, and I'm going to copy and paste it into Lambda. So I'm going to create a new file here, and I've already done that, so I've got this untitled one here. So I'm going to paste that in, and if we just take a quick look at it, then you can see that we're importing a lot of packages, a lot of libraries here. We're defining this Alteryx authentication method here so that we, when we're authenticating to our particular Alteryx gallery, it is able to authenticate, connect, and set all of that up. And then it's creating this. This is how we're actually going to execute our workflow. It's setting up the function for that here. Okay, so we don't need to do anything to that code. We just need to save this. So I'm just going to save that as, I'm going to save it as AYX API .py. And why it's important to save it as .py is so that it knows that it's a Python function that we've written here. And as soon as we hit that save button, you saw like the import went to blue where it was all black writing before. So now it's recognizing it as a Python function that we have. Okay, so that's all set up for us. We don't need to do anything to that. But something that we do need to do actually is that we have all of these packages being read in, and a lot of them are pre-installed for us on AWS Lambda. There is a list that Ben has in his blog of all the ones that are pre-installed, but there are some that aren't pre-installed that we need to go ahead and install. So if I come to my left-hand side here, you'll see that we've got additional resources of layers, and we've got that layers up the top here. So we need to come here, and if this was the first function you're writing, there wouldn't be anything here at the moment. And what we need to do, again, it's all here for us in the Information Lab GitHub page. We've got this requests package.zip, and this is the package that we need to make sure that we install onto our Lambda so that we're able to run these functions, run these packages. So if I were to click on this and download it, then what I would then do is I would come to create a layer. I would call it, my requests package, something like that. Oh, yeah, and of course I've done a space, but you're not allowed a space. So I'd call it something like that. I'd upload that zip file that I've just downloaded, and then I'd, choose Python 3.8 so that it was working there. So I don't need to do any of that because where I've created it before already, I think that it has signed me out. Let me just re-sign into this then, reload that. Now then, let me just get this all back and running. That's what happens when you're trying to do these things live, isn't it? Things just sign you out. So I need to just get that all up and running again. Okay, I'm just doing this on my second screen here for you. Okay, so I'm signing back into the training console, bring that back over here, and we're just going back into Lambda. There we go. Lovely. So we were in our layers there, weren't we? So I'm going to come back to my function, come back to my demo that I was building with you there. And in our layers here, down at the bottom, we just want to make sure that we're adding in a layer. And the layer here that we want to choose from is a custom layer that we've created, and it's the requests. And we're just going to select version 1. And we're just going to add that to our function. So now you can see at the top, we've got a little 1 in brackets there. So what's been able to happen is all of these packages that we're importing are able to be imported because they are all installed for us on our instance. Okay, so we're going well here. We've set up everything we need in order to be able to connect to our Alteryx Gallery API and to actually get this to trigger our workflow. So we're coming back to the Lambda function that is created by default here. And you can see that where we've got this to do implement, that's where we're going to want to be changing things around. So we definitely want it to be calling this event, because that's saying, okay, when the event happens, do this. And the event is our file getting uploaded to our S3 bucket. And when that happens, we want it to trigger this code. So we want it to talk to this file and go ahead and run some code. So I've copied from Ben's blog again what we actually need to have here instead, but I thought I'd talk it through for you. I'll copy it from this notepad, sure, and I'll paste it in instead. Okay, so some things have changed there. We'll start down here at the execute workflow. So this is the function that we defined in this file here, the secondary file, and there are some things that we need for that. We need our API key and our API secret, which come from the Alteryx Gallery. We need those to connect to the Alteryx Gallery API. So we find those by going to my profile on the Alteryx Gallery, and then you'll notice that you have this keys section here. So if you don't have this options, then this would be a time that you would need to talk to your Alteryx server admin. And yeah, then when you can have the correct access installed, I think it's, you can see here down at the side, I've got API access. It says yes for me. Yeah, you would need to talk to your admin to get that set up if that's not something you have already. And you can see down here, the bottom one that we have API access key, which I would just copy and paste into the top bit there. And then we also have a secret, which I'm not going to show to you, but again, it'll be quite a long string that I would just need to copy and paste into that second argument here. Now we're looking for the base URL and the workflow ID. So our base URL is, if I'm looking at when I'm on my Alteryx Gallery, I'm going to zoom in there, and what we would want to have would be this first bit all the way up to Alteryx Cloud. So this would be my base URL, just telling it what Alteryx Gallery am I supposed to be looking for. And the final thing that we need is the workflow ID. So this is the workflow that I am connecting to currently. So if I zoom into there, then the workflow ID is just at the end of the URL. So it's this kind of long string that will connect it, point it to the correct workflow that we want to run. Okay, so if I filled in that information, then I'd nearly be there. But if you're that's kind of what workflow I want to run and where the workflow is sitting. Now we need to tell it the arguments, the things that are going to be changing. So in this case, I mean the file name. Okay, so what we have here is a JSON structure. So first of all, we have this name here, and this is, okay, what is the interface tool that I need to connect to? So this is called file name here. If I come back to my Alteryx workflow and click on my interface tool, my file name, and then I go into the little annotation button here on the left-hand side, then that will be the name of this tool. So you could customize it to be anything you want. You could have it be file name 123, I don't know, file name, this is the name that needs to go into this part of the Python script, anything you like to make it clearer. But in this case, it's just called file name is the name of this tool. And that is where we're looking, because that's where we want to place the new file name from our S3 bucket. Okay, and then the value here is this file name again. And what that means is we've defined this up at the top here. And this file name is connected to an event and is taking an S3 object out of there. Now, Ben explains much better where you get this from. I just wanted to do a quick overview of how this is working, but more details can definitely be found in Ben's blog on this step. But it's just basically defining the parameter that you're reading in, making it dynamic there. Okay, so now that we've defined all of that, then this is ready to work. So one thing that you'll notice is that saying change is not deployed. I mean, we haven't really edited much here, but if I was looking to definitely run this this function itself, I would need to make sure that I've pressed deploy so that it's all ready to go and that everything we're seeing here is actually what's going to be deployed. You have the option to test things, and that is definitely something that is useful when you're setting this up yourself, if you don't want to incur charges as you're testing things. But one final thing that I need to mention before you're ready to go with this, okay, two things actually. One thing is notice the print here. The print is important here because when we came into our CloudWatch Manager and we got those Alteryx messages that I showed you earlier, so that was how we knew that everything was working the way that we hoped it would. If we didn't have this print statement wrapped around our execute workflow function, then we wouldn't be able to see those messages. So that's the penultimate thing I wanted to say to you. And then the final thing that I want to say is that with our configuration here, in our configuration tab, the timeout there is 3 seconds. So that means that the function will trigger the Alteryx workflow to run, but then after 3 seconds, if it hasn't finished, it won't return any of the messages. So something that you're probably likely to want to do is increase this timeout. So maybe, a minute or so, maybe 2 minutes, just so that it gives your workflow a chance to run and a chance to return the messages. If you know your workflow takes, say, longer than that, say your workflow takes 10 minutes instead, you probably want to extend it to 10 minutes, but there is a maximum here of 15 minutes. That's the amount of time that Lambda will wait to return those messages. So if your workflow takes longer than 15 minutes to run, then it can still be successful. You just won't see those success messages within Lambda itself. So that's definitely something to consider if this is something that you're thinking of implementing yourselves. Okay, so hopefully that was a good quick overview of how to set up that process, why you might want to set up that process of triggering your Alteryx workflows to run using Lambda. And yeah, I think that I've gone through every detail, but like I say, this blog from Ben Moss is great for taking you through step by step, slightly slower, but honestly, if I can learn it, anyone can learn it. So thanks very much for watching, and